Okay, I think we're live. Welcome back, everyone, to Fat Free Economics. Today, we are going to answer the specific question: is the housing boom over? You see in the headlines that there are conflicting messages going on in terms of the economic data that is being put out, and the purpose of my channel is to help you resolve some of the contradictions that you see in the clickbait headlines in the news, and give you a proper perspective. And that, or at least that's what I try to do as an economist, and give you some historical perspective, and so you can make better sense out of exactly what's happening, specifically in this case with the housing market. So, just a quick reminder: I stream Wednesday nights and Sunday afternoons. Right now, it's very late. It's Sunday, 11 p.m. And it's because it's 4th of July. And by the way, happy 4th of July, everyone. I hope you had a good holiday weekend. So I've been barbecuing and watching the fireworks. So I'm getting started very late, but I did want to do a live stream today because I promised you that I would talk about the housing trends today. And so, as I mentioned, very often there are conflicting headlines in the news about what is exactly is happening with the economy. So let's take a quick look at what's going on. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you to show you what's happening. So um, here you see this is a chart that was put out by um, Zillow, and you may already be aware that Zillow is owned by Google, who have on their hands a lot of transactional data. Just to give you a quick story, I personally worked with another economist on the home pricing data. I happened to be working for a real estate company some years back, and this is actually before the great housing crash in 2006. And we took a look at the state by state housing data and the ability of Zillow to make proper predictions and the quality of the data. And what we found is it depends a great deal about on the exact state that we're discussing. In California, the data was actually quite good, and their projections were quite reliable. But in other states, it was not so good. It was a little bit shaky. But anyways, sorry to go on as an aside. But just to give you context for the data that Zillow provides, this is a national index. So uh, I would say, they try their best, and their algorithms are quite effective in aggregating, calculating the data. But as they say, garbage in, garbage out. So, and considering the fact that this is also a prediction, we need to take this with a grain of salt. But their overall good faith estimate is that 2021 will actually be a very good year for home sales, right? And given the condition that we see in home sales right now, that's not by any means an outrageous prediction. In fact, it's actually quite reasonable. You know, um, on the other hand, if you were to look at, for example, a headline from CNBC, um, where they're talking about how the housing boom is beginning to fizzle. And the metric that they're pointing to is the weekly mortgage demand falls nearly 7%. So you're sitting there thinking, okay, housing values are going to go up. It's a healthy market. I know that some people are feeling the heat in terms of the prices, but the general impression is that housing prices will continue to go up, right? And then suddenly you see this and say, oh, wait a second, it's something about to pierce the bubble. And by the way, if you hear some odd sounds in the background, let me put myself back in. If you hear some odd sounds in the background, and well, it's the fireworks that are still going off. So apologies for that. But anyways, let's go on. So as I was saying, this is a headline from CNBC that is contradicting the predictions of Google, that said, okay, 2021 is going to be a great year, but now suddenly, are we getting some early indications from the data that the housing market is beginning to cool down, right? And there is another headline that I want to bring to your attention, which is this is from Mish Talk, and sometimes I agree with his analysis, sometimes I don't. But here, it's not a matter of analysis. He's simply giving a chart of the existing home sales, and he is noting that the sales have declined in 4 consecutive months, and it is the lowest reading in 11 months. And what he's saying is, as sales continue to decline, we are the volume of transaction is returning to pre-COVID levels, right? So, could it be the case that there was a burst of demand from the lockdown? People are going outside and saying, "Hey, you know what? I need more space." We're doing social distancing, and there are other demographic factors that we'll get into. But this indication about a cool down itself actually appears quite reasonable, right? Because we could easily believe that there was a burst of demand from people, sitting on their homes and not being able to go out and do anything, and suddenly they say, "Hey, you know what? I really need to um, get my own place because I'm in this apartment building and I'm surrounded by people, and it's not safe for me." So here we have the situation where Zillow is quite confident in saying that based on the massive data that they have, they're predicting a very good year for 2021. And that could still very well be true. On the other hand, these other outlets are reporting that there is early indications in the data that are blinking some red signals and that we need to pay attention. So here's the thing. And this is the reason why I started this channel, which is, how is a person in the public supposed to resolve these kinds of conflicting signals? These are momentous decisions that people are making, whether they should buy a home, they should hold off on it. On the one hand, people are saying, this is a great time to buy. Interest rates are so low, borrowing costs are so low. This is a chance in a lifetime. And on the other hand, people are saying, well, look, you got to be crazy. You got to have rocks in your head to buy now because prices are way inflated. They're very inflated, and they may crash sometime in the near future, and you're going to be left with nothing, right? So this is a consequential decision, and I can understand that some people who are watching the news are saying, "Hey, you know what? I need to figure out what exactly is happening here because I need to make a move," right? So with that said, um, yeah, I always keep forgetting to put the banner there. Um, so with that said, the conflicting narrative in the news, we need to understand what exactly is true. And when we start talking about uh, these kinds of conflicting signals and what's happening with the economy, one thing that is always good to keep in mind is that the the dynamic of supply and demand is always uh, in force, right? And so in order for us to have a calm, rational assessment about what's happening with the housing market, let's first do a very quick, broad overview about the supply and demand situation, because that was greatly distorted by the pandemic and the lockdowns, right? And we need to tease that out. And could that have, the pandemic, could it have had some sort of distorting effect on the market where price signals were disrupted, supply and demand are out of balance, and the rise in housing prices is actually a problem with the market still in this transition phase, right? So, what's really going on? So, let's take a quick overview of supply and demand, and then we'll move on to my overall assessment. And I think the final point that I want to make here is something that every home investor should realize, right? It is something that is not very well known to the public, and yet in economic circles, of course, things are always being debated. But this is something for home investors to really consider. So we'll get to that final point at the end of this video. But first, the overview. Okay. So let me share my screen again, and this is a chart from the New York Times, right? And again, every newspaper has their bias, but this is they're quoting a research done by Altos Research, and they're making note of a very significant trend in housing, and specifically the housing supply over the last few years, going back to 2015. And what they note is that, as the chart says, the number of homes for sales nationally has plummeted, right? And intuitively understand what that means for the market. If the supply of something, of a good, for example, something that is so necessary, like housing, goes down, then that immediately puts upward prices on pressure. Supply goes down while the demand remains constant, then of course prices are going to rise up. So then now we need to look at uh, the other side of the equation, which is the demand portion. Okay, so let's uh, take a look at that. So again, this is just a quick overview. We don't have time to spend 3 hours on all the technical data, but um, you know, this is a quote from Benjamin Keyes. He's an economist, and you'll find in this channel I'm always quoting a lot of economists because we respect each other. And he's pointing out, based on that chart, the supply side is really tricky, right? Who wants to sell a house in the middle of a pandemic? That's what I keep coming back to. Is this the time you want to open your house up to people walking through it? No, of course not. And I think this is a sentiment that's been echoed by a lot of people, right? During the time of pandemic, yes, people are realizing that they need more square footage because of social distancing and wanting to feel safe. But on the other hand, on the supply side, you know, do you really want a whole bunch of people, tramping through your house? Who knows if they've been vaccinated, not vaccinated? And this is, probably even before, um, the vaccination programs really took effect, right? So it's your home, it's your private space. And so obviously you can understand why it's a problem to open up to strangers, right? And so this is again pointing to the issues with supply. We'll get to the demand in a bit, but let's take another look at this chart right here. Right, let me expand this so that you can see it more fully. And we noted that the national uh, trend in terms of supply of homes has been on a downward streak, and we get a breakdown on the major metro areas in the city. I'm sorry, in the country, and we see that for almost all of them, again, this is further confirmation that the supply of homes is going down, right? Again, naturally putting upward pressure on housing prices, right? And now, right now that interest rates are very low. That statement about borrowing costs being very low is obviously true, right? Mortgage rates are very low. In fact, I myself did a refinance of a mortgage. This is probably the final last refi that I will ever need to do because I got a rate of 2.5%. That's unbelievable. If you look at the national trends for interest rates and mortgage rates, you'll realize that is an unbelievable low rate. So great deal. And so what you have is a situation where clearly the supply of homes has been on a downward trend nationally, even before the pandemic, right? And now you've got interest rates in response to the shutdown of the economy, the Federal Reserve trying to bring things back to normal, trying to stimulate economic activity. And then you've got people saying, "I need more square footage because there's a deadly virus going around," right? And so um, there is a statement in the article, you know, um, where again, this is talking about how um, you know the um, the demand for housing has also been affected by the pandemic, right? Um, and one crazy thing that's been noted by economists lately is that the price for renting has diverged from the general trend for single family homes, right? And I think this has particularly been a huge impact because of the pandemic. And by the way, for an economist, we generally consider housing, the price of housing and rent to move together because they are experiencing the same kind of demographic trends and pricing pressures, right? When people are earning more real income and they're looking for housing, they have a choice between rental and housing. So, a rising tide floats all the boats, right? And so, what people are finding out due to the pandemic um, is that a lot of people who have been laid off, they've been working in the retail industry, whatnot. They have gone back to live with their families. They've gone back to um, I don't know, staying with friends. So and then of course some renters are being enticed. If you haven't lost your job yet, right? Um, some rent some renters are being enticed to enter the waters of home ownership, right? And like I said before, so the low interest rate are actually helping to convert at least some of the prior renters to dip their toes into the housing market. We've got a long-term trend, excuse me, of housing supply going down, and now with COVID, saying people, people saying, you know what, just stay out of my house. I don't want you inside, right? And of course, a lot of the people, generally, uh, the demographic that offers homes of existing sales are the older generation, right? Senior citizens and whatnot of that age range. And because of COVID, the thought that they might move into, let's say, an assisted housing facility or some kind of housing complex. In prior times, they may have wanted that just because of the social interaction and the affordability, you know. But nowadays, they're feeling more reluctant to let go of their existing homes. So that has also had a downward pressure on the supply of homes. So when you step back and take a look at this situation, you've got to believe that housing prices will continue to go up, right? Now, is that true? That's not what I'm saying right now is not the final conclusion. We'll get into that. But just looking at the equation of supply and demand, you have to say the conditions are ripe for a continuation of the red hot, housing market. So then the question is there anything that could derail this rise of housing prices, right? Obviously, nothing can go on to infinity. No one is saying that. People are making a reasonable uh, argument that the market forces in terms of supply and demand are pushing us toward higher housing prices, right? So, in order to answer this question, what could actually uh, put some brakes on the market? Um, oh, sorry. You know what? Actually, I was going to also uh, show you this quote from Mark Zandi. He's the chief economist at Moody's Analytics, and he's basically, uh, kind of echoing what we're saying right now, which is, he's saying, "quote We're all looking for a unified field theory for what's going on. We had all these disparate pieces of information. Everyone's got their own telescope looking up into the sky, measuring different things. It's hard to put it all together, right?" And he's a chief economist, right? By the way, just to give you another side story, I met Mark Zandi in person because, like I said, I was working for the real estate company, and he came by. I invited him to come to company headquarters and give a presentation about the real estate market. The situation back then was nothing like this, of course, but I had a chance to meet with Mark Zandi. We bought a lot of the the market data that his company was selling. Right at the time, he wasn't working for Moody's Analytics. It was actually I forget the company name, but yeah, they aggregated home sales data, and we bought from them. And then Moody's took over that company. But Yeah, so Mark Zandi came over, and I'll be honest with you. I know he's a very bright person, but the presentation that he gave didn't really impress my CFO. And I'm just telling this as a amusing story. I'm not trying to uh, throw any shade on Mark, because he's a very influential, often quoted economist, as you can see. But anyway, so I met Mark Zandi. His presentation about market trends didn't really knock our socks off, but all in all, I thought he was a great guy. But anyways, um, that is an aside. He is talking about the exact same things. We're all looking at different signals of supply and demand, and he's himself is saying, how do we put all this information together? And which is, of course, the point of this live stream, right? And so, going back to the question, right? Going back to the question of what would derail this market, right? Let's take a look at something that I wanted to show you, and this is I'm going to bring this up on screen. This is a definition that I got from Investopia, and it's talking about the affordability index. Now, as I say that, I think you get the point right away, right? Okay, sorry, I'm supposed to. I'm always behind on putting the banners down below. Anyway, so the affordability index measures a person's ability to afford an item compared to their income or the average income for their country or region, et cetera, et cetera. Housing affordability varies by race according to income and other factors that impact mortgage approvals, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you get the point. Um, we talked about how housing prices are continuing to go up, but they can't go up forever, right? Even though there's high demand, even though there is tight supply, right? Housing prices will reach a point where the affordability is out of reach for many, many people, right? And there's another chart that we can take a look at. So this is simply a definition. So we need to take a look at some data to determine whether, uh, is this real? What is the current state of the housing affordability, right? And so here we are looking S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller indices. By the way, sorry, another quick aside. We used to buy data from CoreLogic ourselves, and I have to say, our assessment of the data was that actually their data was actually very messy. Not often high quality, but we're looking at a national trend, not broken down by local markets. So, it's actually quite reliable. It's only when you look at metro by metro that you run into some quality data issues. But in any case, um, you see the long term trend here of uh, of um, of the Case-Shiller indexes. And this is simply, we don't need to get into all the details of how this is calculated, but simply think of uh, it's a percentage change relative to a year ago in terms of housing prices. So it gives you an indication of the direction, the direction where housing prices are moving, right? And if you look at the black line, which is a national trend, we'll just stick with that, right? Here you can see around 2006, housing prices were very, very high, very, very high. Sorry, and you know, we all know what happened around that time. 2006 was the peak of the housing bubble, right? And right after that, it started to crash. We all have, our own painful memories, I think, of that time. I remember talking to a colleague. I was working at Toyota at the time, and he bought his home, I think mid 2006, and then it started to go down. And it was heartbreaking to see his reaction over time because he had literally bought at the very tippy top of the market. It's sad to see something like that, but that's a human face on what's happening with these abstract price trends, right? And so let's take a look again at the chart. And so you can see this crash. I mean, we all know what this is all about. The prices started to recover in 2012. Things went down a little bit again. They're recovering, and so generally from the bottom of the market, the Great Recession and all that. I'm sorry, from the housing crash, it has been. You can see the trend line. It has been on an upward trend, so it's about 8%. It hasn't quite reached the the heights of the housing bubble, but you can see that it's getting there, right? It's getting there, right? And the point of this chart and why I'm bringing this up is, again, affordability is the third leg in the wheel of the housing market, right? If that goes away, the whole market becomes unstable. And the question is then, has affordability risen, has dropped so low? Again, this chart is about housing prices trend. I'm talking about the trend in affordability index, right? Um, and then you have to consider, has affordability become so challenging, has gone so much so that even though there is demand, right? If there, it doesn't matter if there's demand. If they can't actually pay for the house, then the transaction is not going to happen, right? And looking at the Case Shiller, the price index, I don't think that we're there yet, but we are getting there. We're moving into that territory, right? And so, with regards to the question, does that mean that the housing prices are going to continue to rise over the next year, and then we run into some hard roadblocks and stuff? And surprisingly, and this is my final point that I mentioned at the beginning, this is the point that I would like every home investors to understand. And the answer is no, right? But it's not for the reason that you might think, right? There are fluctuations that are perceived by consumers in the housing market, over the course of some years. We kind of understand sometimes there are housing bubbles and whatnot, but uh, remember, this index is called the Case-Shiller index, and one of the people who created this index is Robert Shiller, and he has done a great deal of research on the housing market, and I think his conclusion may actually shock you, right? So I'm going to bring up an excerpt about his research, and I think we need to um, go over that. This is actually, let me just also talk about this, because this is actually very illuminating. Sorry, we'll get into Robert Schiller's research, but um, this is a quote from the National Association of Realtors chief economist Lawrence Yun. No, I have not met him, but we need to understand that he is an advocate for the real estate association. So he's always going to have a positive spin, and it's my job to unwind that and put that on a proper level. And so his quote is saying, "Home sales fell moderately in May and are now approaching pre-pandemic activity." Right? That previous article that you saw, where it says existing home sales declined 4 consecutive months, lowest reading in 11 months. Sales decline about to reach pre-COVID levels as prices rise again, right? And here is Lawrence Yun, who is an advocate, and he himself is echoing that sentiment. Okay, he is echoing that sentiment. And sorry, I promise you, we will get to that final point because you really need to hear that. Okay, it is eye-opening for, I think, practically every homeowner. But just to emphasize the point, um, lack of inventory continues to be, and I'm quoting him. Sorry, lack of inventory continues to be the overwhelming factor holding back home sales. But listen to what he says. Falling affordability is simply squeezing some first-time buyers out of the market. And that phrase, affordability and also first-time buyers out of the market, is super important because the real estate market is like a ladder, right? The first-time buyers, buy a home and the sellers upgrade to a bigger, better model, and then they sell and they upgrade and go up the ladder. Okay, obviously that's how it works, right? Now he is, quite frankly, a salesman. I'm going to be blunt and say you should not trust his spin. You should not trust his statements because some of his spin, his interpretations of the data in past times has been so outrageous that people have laughed at him. You know, and so okay, he's an economist and he's got a job to do, and he accepted his role as an advocate. But we understand what's going on here, and yet even Lawrence Yun says that affordability is squeezing out some first-time buyers, right? And so again, affordability is the key in the near term for the real estate market, and I think it hasn't gotten to the level where um, you know it's going to basically freeze the entire real estate market. But there is a broader, more historical and longer point that's needs to be made here, right? And we're going to get to it now. So, um, and this is the research that was done by, and let me, okay, and this is my concluding statement for now about the real estate market and the real truth about the real estate market. And I know there's a lot of text on here, um, so I'm going to summarize for you, right? Um, and just quickly quoting from this excerpt, right? So Robert Schiller wrote a book called Irrational Exuberance, and in that book, he says, you know, it's not a quote, but contrary to popular belief, there has been no, excuse me, continuous upward trend in home prices in the U.S., and the home prices show a strong tendency to return to the 1890 levels in real terms. Moreover, he illustrates how the pattern of changes in home prices bears no relation to changes in construction costs, interest rates, and population. Schiller notes that there is a strong perception across the globe that home prices are continuously increasing and that this kind of sentiment and paradigm may be fueling bubbles in real estate. Okay. So he goes on to kind of explain in his book about some of the reasons why this happens, but his contention is that, and there is significant amount of data to validate this, right? Again, when it comes to science, things are never 100% locked in stone. There's always new data to consider. But in his research, he found considerable um, evidence in terms of the long term price trends that housing prices have their ups and downs, right? But if you average out the normal trends, they always return to this, let's call it a long term um, standard price level. And the price level he found was in 1890 level. Now, I know this is going to be shocking to a lot of people who are buying homes in the hope that it's going to be a kind of great investment topic. And in the short term, it very well can be, right? Because housing bubbles are also a reality, right? Are we in a housing bubble, or is it simply a natural trend? Well, what Robert Schiller is saying, the natural trend long term is that housing prices always return to a national level, historical level, right? And so I know that a lot of people right now are going to scratching their heads and saying, "Wait, I've seen pricings go up. About 30 years ago, homes were $20,000, and now they're worth 100,000, $1 million." Of course, there's variations in local markets, but his research is showing that the vast majority of the rises in home values, um, it's actually due to inflation, right? Uh, it's inflation that's causing the perception of home values to rise in the long term. Yes, that's very important in the long term, right? And he says that um, over the years, those housing prices will converge back to the um, to the historical level, right? Now, I would ask you to kind of chew on that for a little bit, right? Because I think when you look at the news and the the speculation and the energy, excitement, and fear of the housing market, especially in the last few years, makes you think that that housing prices are on this wide swing. And in the course of events, in the long term, that is definitely true. Does that mean that every price rise is actually a bubble? Well, that depends on where you place the threshold. But again, nationally, long term, these the prices do return to historical level, and so you have to kind of think about that and say, is housing really an investment? Is it a place to live? You know, it might be an investment in the short term. In the long term, you need to be aware that that might not be the case. Okay, so again, I think the public perception about this is at variance with the actual long-term data, and that can be a shock to someone. So those are my concluding remarks, right? So in the near term, I think we are getting more and more into the territory where affordability is becoming a real threat to the housing market. Now, that probably means that housing prices will continue to be hot and will continue to rise in the immediate future. But we're going to hit a wall sometime this year or maybe next year, depending on obviously on how quickly they rise. You know, um, and long term, you have to understand that the research data says, well, all the housing prices are going to converge to the historical national norm. So that's it for this live stream. I hope you found that helpful, even if a little bit disheartening. But I gave you the straight facts, you know. And so my next stream will be on Wednesday night, and I hope to see you there. Good night.